The first wire sang before anyone saw it. At 0347, with the moon hung low over the broken terraces and the wind dragging the smell of diesel through the wadi, Lena Voss watched a young corporal take one more step toward a pressure plate buried under 6 inches of chalk-white dust. Through her scope, the world narrowed to fragments. A boot sole lifting, a thread of copper glinting beneath gravel, a dead apricot leaf pinned against stone, trembling though the rest of the ground lay perfectly still. She pressed her throat mic, Raven 2-1, halt. Halt now. Left foot where it is. Static swallowed the first half of her warning. The second half reached them just in time for Sergeant Nolan Price to throw an arm across the corporal's chest and yank him backward, so hard both men crashed into a terrace wall. Pebbles spilled. A rifle clattered. For one breathless second, nothing moved but dust. Then the corporal looked down. The plate was there. Handmade. Circular. Buried shallow. 2 artillery shells wired in series beneath it. Enough to erase the front half of a man and blind everyone standing around him. Who called that? Nolan snapped into his radio. Lena stayed prone on the ridge, cheek welded to the stock of her rifle, pulse steady by force and training. Her hide was cut into the spine of the mountain so well that from the valley floor she was nothing but another slab of shadow and shale. The insurgents owned the road below. They owned the terraces. They owned the irrigation channels, the abandoned pomegranate orchards, the roof lines with their blind corners and firing slits. But for the moment, from 827 meters out, Lena owned the angle. I called it, she said. You're walking into a layered kill box. The lieutenant answered this time, voice clipped and irritated, the tone of a man who hated receiving orders from someone outside his chain. Observer, stay in your lane. We're already behind schedule. Lena shifted half an inch and caught movement at the north wall of the village schoolhouse. Not movement exactly, the absence of it. A rectangle of darkness where a rifle barrel should not have been. Your lane is mine, she said. We've swept the route. No, Lena whispered, almost to herself. You swept the route you were meant to see. A pause. Then, with the kind of impatience that gets men written home in sealed cases, the lieutenant said, You've got optics, not omniscience. Lena's jaw tightened. Sir, listen carefully. Nobody hangs fresh laundry in an empty village. Nobody leaves 3 goats tied in open moonlight unless they want you watching the wrong thing. That wall to your east was repaired yesterday. The mud hasn't dried evenly. There's a triggerman within 40 meters, and the lane ahead is too clean. Another pause. The wind hissed across her suppressor. Then a different voice came over the net, lower, older, burdened with the fatigue of too many deployments. Sergeant Nolan again. Lieutenant, she called the plate. A brittle second stretched. The lieutenant exhaled into the mic. Observer, say again your confidence. Lena kept her glass fixed on the dark rectangle near the schoolhouse. High. Very high. How high? Her answer came flat. I'm recon-trained. And whoever built this wants you alive for another 200 meters before he starts killing you. That landed. She heard it in the silence that followed. Below, 6 men flattened in a cover along the terrace line while the interpreter in their stack, thin shoulders, borrowed helmet, hands trembling on his radio handset, ducked so low he nearly vanished into the stone. The corporal Lena had just saved sat back against the wall and stared at the dust between his boots as if it had personally betrayed him. He couldn't have been older than 23. Lena knew because she had spent the last hour studying the squad the way other people studied weather. Lieutenant Aaron Mercer led from the middle because Academy confidence survives longer than it should. Nolan Price stayed front left, where the first bullet would probably find him if anyone made a mistake. The youngest one, the corporal with a near miss, was Jude Mercer. No relation to the lieutenant. Radio operator, shoulders still too new to carry that much gear without pain. Their medic, Ruiz, walked light and fast, head constantly turning. Then 2 riflemen, Baines and Holloway, disciplined enough to keep their sectors, but not seasoned enough to question the map. 6 Americans, 1 interpreter, 1 route laid out by a local informant who had been dead for 12 hours. And somewhere in that village ahead of them, hidden among the cracked cisterns and roofless houses, waited the man Lena had hoped never to meet again. Fard Hakim, the cartographer. He had once trained as a civil engineer before war, taught him a more efficient use for geometry. He was famous among the cells along the border belt for designing ambushes like mathematical proofs. Elegant, patient, and merciless. He didn't waste ammunition on chaos. He built sequences. Pressure led to cover. Cover led to wire. Wire led to a choke point. Choke point led to crossfire. If you survived the bullets, you found a dead ground already mortared. If you escaped that, he let you run into the second team waiting where the terrain narrowed and your choices disappeared. Lena had seen one of his blueprints after a raid in Marzak province. She had also seen what the finished version did to a 12-man patrol. She still dreamed in fragments from that morning. A boot with no leg inside it. A radio calling names into smoke. Her spotter, Cam, trying to laugh through a chest wound because he knew what happened if he stopped. Below, Mercer keyed his mic again. Observer, can you identify trigger source? Yes. Can you engage? Lena breathed once and found the rectangle in the wall again. A sliver of cheek. An eyelid. Patience. The triggerman was waiting for bunching. Waiting for panic. Waiting for men to crowd the plate, so one command wire could solve 6 problems. Yes, she said. Take it. The shot barely disturbed the night. Suppressed, subsonic, little more than a hard cough against the wind. Through the scope, she saw the triggerman's face fold backward and vanish from the opening. One heartbeat later, something metallic struck stone inside the schoolhouse. No explosion followed. Fard's men were careful. They seldom wired a single point to a dead man's reflex. Lena cycled the bolt and kept searching. One target down. Do not move forward. Repeat, do not move forward. The lieutenant sounded different now. Humble, but only a little. What do you want us to do? Lena swallowed the urge to say what she was actually thinking, which was, I want you to live long enough to be angry later. Backtrack 3 meters. Single file. Nolan first. Step exactly in your own prints. Jude, keep your radio off the ground. Ruiz, watch the right wall. Nobody touches anything metal, cloth, or new-looking earth. For a moment, under the cold stars and the weight of the ridge, the squad obeyed the invisible woman they had ignored less than a minute earlier. And that was the problem, because once Fard realized someone on the high ground understood his language, he would stop hunting the squad and start hunting her. Before we see how this unfolds, take a breath. If you're already feeling that tension, if you need to know how one unseen operator holds a whole battlefield together, subscribe now. We tell stories about impossible choices and the people who make them under pressure. Now watch what Lena sees next. Lena slid backward from the lip of her firing position and began the slow, deliberate crawl toward her secondary hide 30 meters upslope. She moved like water through stone, letting her knees and elbows find the channels she had memorized before first light. Nothing in the mountains forgave a silhouette. Nothing in insurgent country forgave a repeated muzzle flash, even a suppressed one. If Farid was in the village, and Lena would have bet bone on it, he was already reconstructing her angle. She reached the secondary position, eased the rifle over a shelf of shale, and reacquired the squad. They were doing well. Too well, maybe. Relief makes men hungry for momentum. Momentum gets them dead. Jude Mercer was breathing hard. Even through magnified glass, Lena could see the tremor in his fingers as he cradled the radio antenna away from the ground, exactly as she had ordered. Good kid. Listens fast. She clicked twice on her mic. A private code she'd improvised for Nolan during the last 6 hours of cat and mouse Overwatch. 1 click meant freeze. 2 meant scan vertical. 3 meant get low and stay low. Nolan lifted his head, just enough to check the rooftops. Good. There was again that tiny dislocation in the pattern of things. A water jar on a parapet where no woman would leave it overnight in a fighting district. Too centered. Too deliberate. Lena traced the line beneath it and found a filament wire running down behind the wall into darkness. Mercer, tell Baines not to use the center gap. Left side only. There's a tie-off on the roof. Mercer related. Baines shifted. The moment he avoided the center gap, the jar exploded from a bullet. Not hers this time, showering the lane with pottery shards and revealing a machine gun nest that had been waiting for him to take the obvious path. Tracer laced the darkness. Orange streaks bit into the terrace stones where Baines would have been. The squad flattened instantly. Lena already had the nest. She did not fire at the gun. She fired 6 inches left of it, where the assistant gunner crouched with a spare belt and a better field of view. The man jerked sideways. The gun stuttered. Nolan popped up just enough to rake the parapet with controlled bursts, and the nest went still. 2 targets down, Lena murmured, though no one had asked for a count. She kept one anyway. Farid-like teams inside teams. Kill chains inside kill zones. If he had staged a machine gun to catch a redirected patrol, then he had likely placed an observer to report the patrol's change in behavior. Men like him needed feedback. Feedback sharpened the blade. She found the observer in the irrigation tower west of the village, not by movement, but by the briefest glint of lenses catching starlight. He was good, smart enough to stay back, smarter than the others. Lena held for a lull in the wind, then pressed the trigger. The glint vanished. 3. Below, the squad used the silence to break contact from the first lane and work south along a dry runnel choked with reeds. From above, it looked safer. From above, all death looked geometric. "Stop," Lena said. This time no one argued. She zoomed in on the runnel floor. A child's sandal lay, half buried, near a bend. Blue plastic. Cartoon rabbit on the strap. Out here, in a district emptied of families 3 days earlier. Farid. He used things like that because he understood the human brain. Soldiers are trained to fear what looks wrong. He baited them with what looked sad. "Jude," Lena said quietly, "tell the lieutenant if he sees anything that reminds him of home, he goes around it." Mercer hesitated before transmitting, maybe unsure whether the warning would sound ridiculous. Nolan spared him the trouble. "You heard her. Around it." Baines used the muzzle of his rifle to nudge the sandal from 5 feet away. Nothing happened. Then he relaxed. Lena's stomach dropped. Back. Too late. The sandal itself was clean. The earth beneath it wasn't. Baines had shifted weight to his rear boot without realizing it, heel grinding into a pressure switch hidden under the reed mat. The blast punched mud and metal into the air. Baines went down screaming, his lower leg wrapped in blood and torn fabric. Holloway dragged him behind the bend, while Ruiz slid in on both knees, hands already working. "Status," Mercer shouted. "Alive," Ruiz snapped. "For now." Lena swore under her breath, the sound lost to the wind. Farid always paid attacks on caution. If he couldn't kill the point man, he maimed the second. Force the medic forward. Force the team to cluster. Force time pressure. Then hit them where care turns into vulnerability. She scanned the high ground opposite the runnel and found it. A culvert mouth camouflaged with stone and brush. Muzzle shadow, just inside, trained on the casualty site. She fired once. The muzzle shadow disappeared. 4. But the real threat was not the shooter. It was the mortar tube she had not yet found. The skin between her shoulders tightened. Farid loved to wait for medicine. He loved the way compassion rearranged a formation. "Mercer, move the casualty now. 20 meters south. Fast. We need a tourniquet on. You need to be gone before the correction round lands." Nolan didn't ask. He grabbed Baines under the arms. Holloway took the wounded leg. Ruiz ran bent over them, keeping pressure as they dragged the man through the reeds. Jude stumbled after them with the radio and nearly lost his footing in the dark. A second later, the first mortar round hit exactly where Baines had been. The earth jumped. A flat, brutal concussion slapped the runnel walls and sent a sheet of dirt raining over the squad. Lena was already searching for the tube. Not the flash. Never the flash. The recoil pattern. The angle of disturbed dust. The hidden line between ambition and physics. There, behind the old tannery, roof collapsed inward. One square of courtyard still open to the sky. She adjusted 3 clicks, ignored the sting in her left elbow, and fired through a gap in broken masonry no wider than a dinner plate. Somewhere behind the tannery wall, the mortar went silent. 5. Ruiz was speaking now, voice clipped and calm in the way good medics sound when panic would be contagious. "Tourniquet secured. Baines is losing a lot, but he's with me. We can move." Mercer finally sounded like a man who understood the shape of the night. "Observer, you got eyes on extraction?" "No extraction yet. The northern spur road is seeded. The western ridge is watched. South is your least bad option." "Least bad," Nolan repeated. "Comforting." Lena almost smiled. Nolan was the kind of non-commissioned officer every patrol deserved and few got. Skeptical without paralysis, tired without carelessness. If Mercer had enough humility left to listen to him, the squad might still see daylight. She checked her watch. Dawn was less than an hour away. That changed everything. Darkness had been her ally, giving her room to move, shoot, and reposition without exposing the scale of what she was doing. Daylight would flatten the mountain. It would sharpen shadow lines, reveal scuffs, betray the route she had crawled in, and turn her from rumor into target. Farr knew that too. If he had built the sequence the way she suspected, then the most lethal phase was timed not for now, but for first light, when frightened men started making visible choices. A memory came uninvited, as precise as a blade. Cam beside her on a different ridge years earlier, rain seeping into both their collars, whispering over shared glass. The trap isn't where the bomb is. The trap is where they need you to stand afterward. He had been 29 when he died. He collected old maps and brewed terrible coffee in a steel cup blackened by a dozen fires. He had also been the first person to tell Lena that being the smartest one on the hill didn't make you safe. It just meant you died later if you got sentimental. Below, the squad reached a low enclosure wall behind the tannery. Ruiz was cutting away Baines's boot. Blood darkened the dirt beneath them. Jude kept twisting to look uphill as if he could force the darkness to reveal the woman whose voice had become the only reliable thing in a collapsing mission. "Observer," Mercer said, quieter now. "Who the hell are we dealing with?" Lena kept her eyes on the village. "A man who likes second guesses, and who's probably wondering why you're still alive." "Name?" She hesitated. Names change morale. Some turn fear into focus. Others turn focus into fatalism. Nolan made the choice for her. If she knows it, we need it. Lena let the word out. Farid Hakim. Silence. Even Jude knew the name. Lena heard his sharp inhale over the open mic. Mercer's voice dropped. "The cartographer?" "Yes." Ruiz muttered something that did not fully make it through the static, but sounded like a prayer spoken by someone who no longer believed in them. "Why didn't Command tell us he was in Sector?" Mercer asked. "Because Command didn't know," Lena said. "Or because somebody wanted to keep the briefing clean." "Same difference out here," Nolan said. He was right. The mission, officially, was a route confirmation patrol linked to a scheduled meet with a local schoolmaster willing to trade names for passage guarantees. Low visibility. Quick in and out. The kind of task staff officers called manageable. But schoolmasters didn't strip whole villages bare before dawn, and informants didn't choose ambush districts as meeting sites unless fear or money had already chosen for them. Lena zoomed in on the schoolhouse again. The dead triggerman still lay where he had fallen. No retrieval attempt. No rescue. Farid didn't waste men on sentiment either. Then she saw it. A chalk mark on the outer wall. Fresh. White against mud brick. 3 short horizontal strokes crossed by 1 vertical line. Not tactical graffiti. Not tribal notation. Not random. A count. Farid was tallying too. Not bodies. Interventions. He knew someone was unraveling his work piece by piece, and he was marking the fact in full view of anyone trained to notice. A message, then. I see the hand, even if I can't yet see the face. Lena felt something cold and familiar settle behind her ribs. The true duel had started. "Mercer," she said, "change frequency now. Primary net is compromised. You think he's listening? I think he's teaching." Static fluttered while Jude switched settings with fumbling hands. When the new channel opened, the sound was cleaner, thinner, more intimate. Nolan came on first. "Still with us. For now. Good. Because I'm about done pretending this is your average Overwatch." "It isn't." He exhaled. "Copy that." The squad moved again, slower now, dragging Baines on a poncho litter improvised from rifles and webbing. South of the tannery, the ground dipped into an abandoned orchard. Rows of dead pomegranate trees stood black and twisted against the paling eastern sky, their trunks flayed by old shrapnel. Empty irrigation ditches cut the earth into lanes. To a conventional eye, the orchard offered concealment. To Lena, it offered lanes of fire. She hated it immediately. "No orchard," she said. Mercer sounded strained. "We don't have a lot of terrain left to reject." Then reject it harder. A beat passed. "Reason? Because dead trees make great range markers. Because those ditches canalize movement. Because if I were Fard and I had a wounded man slowing you down, I'd want you exactly where roots hide wires and branches break up your thermal signature from anyone trying to help." Ruiz cut in, breathing hard. "He's fading, Lena." It was the first time one of them had used her name. That, more than anything, told her how frightened they were. She made the calculation. Orchard or open slope. Bullets or traps. Cover or observation. Baines's blood loss against Dawn. Her hide against Fard's patience. Then she saw the small stone shrine halfway up the southern rise, a place marker built into the hillside decades earlier. Crumbling. Half collapsed. Too exposed for comfort, but not prepped. Not yet. Fard liked certainty in his geometry. That shrine sat off-axis, inconvenient, not attractive enough to pull a tired patrol unless somebody saw what it offered. Broken walls, line of sight, and one narrow approach that could actually be defended. "South Rise," Lena said. "Small shrine at 1 o'clock. Move there. Fast but not bunched." "Open ground," Mercer said. "Yes. We'll be visible. You're already dead if you stay where the terrain makes sense." No one answered, which meant they were moving. The climb was ugly from the start. Loose scree, thorn scrub, packs catching on stone. Ruiz and Holloway hauled the poncho litter while Nolan and Mercer leapfrogged security. Jude almost went down twice. The interpreter lagged, limping now, terror blowing his breath out in little white bursts. Halfway up, the first sniper round cracked past Mercer's ear and punched chalk from the rocks behind him. Everyone dropped. Lena followed the echo, not the shot. One ridge over. Northern knuckle. Excellent position. Too far for panic fire, perfect for discipline. The sniper had waited until the squad committed uphill, revealing the real intention of the orchard below, not to kill them there, but to herd them into a climb. She found only a slit between stones. Then the slit blinked. Lena fired. Nothing obvious happened. No body flopped. No dramatic collapse. Just stillness where there had been predation. Sometimes that was enough. Mercer crawled behind a boulder, touched his ear, and looked at the blood on his glove with an expression that made him suddenly much younger. "You hit him?" Nolan asked. "I hit the problem," Lena said. 6. The squad resumed the climb. Dawn began as a gray wash over the eastern ridges, flattening the stars and turning every edge of rock into a blade. Lena knew she needed to move before full light locked her in place. Her third hide sat farther south, above the shrine, but getting there required crossing 20 meters of bare shale with no cover at all. She waited until the squad drew attention with movement below, then slid, rolled, and crawled across the exposed slab while the valley kept breathing around her. A bullet struck stone 10 feet behind her and sang away into dark. Another hit close enough to spit grit across her cheek. Not random. Fard had not found her exact nest, but he had bracketed the ridge. She dove behind a lichen-black boulder and stayed still until the mountain forgot her shape. When she looked down again, the squad had reached the shrine. Up close, it was even smaller than she had judged, barely a roofless rectangle with one standing wall and a half-collapsed alcove facing east. Somebody had once painted the interior blue. Rain and smoke had worn it into bruised patches. Dried wax pooled near a niche where travelers must have left candles long before the road belonged to armed men. Ruiz got Baines under cover and checked his pupils. Nolan posted on the north edge. Mercer knelt beside Jude, speaking low and fast. The interpreter sat with his hands over his face. Lena scanned outward from them in widening rings. There was the orchard, silent and patient. There, the tannery. There, the schoolhouse. There, the ridge where the sniper had been. There, the lane with the pressure plate. A map of almost death stitched together by one unseen mind. And then she noticed something worse than movement. No birds. Not a single one, lifting from the orchard as dawn brushed the branches. Farad's men had strung line between the trees high enough to catch torsos, low enough to miss optics from above unless you knew the exact angle to look for. Probably connected to grenades or directional charges. The orchard wasn't just a funnel. It was a harvesting machine. She keyed the mic. Nobody leaves that shrine downhill. Not for any reason. Mercer replied. We're pinned if we stay. You're eviscerated if you run. Nolan studied the orchard through his own optic and let out a slow breath. She's right. I see one line. Maybe two. You see one because he wants you seeing one, Lena said. Assume more. Jude looked toward the valley, then up toward the ridge, as if he could triangulate her through faith alone. Why is he doing all this for one patrol? Lena answered before Mercer could shut the question down. Because you're not the point. That turned every head. Then what is? Mercer asked. Lena kept watching the schoolhouse wall with its chalk tally. Your bait. No one spoke. He doesn't build this much architecture for 6 rifles and a medic, she continued. He builds it for response. For QRF. For ISR. For whoever comes looking when your check-in window closes. Ruiz looked up from Baines. So with the first act? Yes. The words settled like frost. In another life, Lena might have softened them. Out here, false comfort killed faster than shrapnel. Mercer rubbed a hand over his face. Our missed check-in is in 12 minutes. Then he expects you to panic in 10. Nolan gave a humorless laugh. Comforting, round 2. Do we call for birds? Jude asked. No, Lena said immediately. Mercer bristled. We absolutely call for support. And give him exactly what he built for. He wants a predictable orbit, predictable response time, predictable focus. He wants everyone looking at your shrine while something bigger moves somewhere else. What bigger? Mercer asked. Lena didn't answer right away, because she had only suspicion and pattern, and suspicion can sound like madness until it proves itself with blood. Then she saw the northern road beyond the village. A flatbed truck, tarp-covered, idling behind a mud wall where it had no reason to be at dawn. Her stomach turned to ice. Explosives, she said. Or prisoners. Maybe both. He's staging movement under your noise. Nolan caught on first. The patrol's a screen. Yes. For what? Lena tightened her grip on the rifle. For a convoy transfer or a relocation. Something too valuable to expose without forcing our attention elsewhere. Mercer looked at Jude. Push a burst to command. Minimal wording. Contact, complex ambush, possible diversion operation, grid follows. Jude nodded and transmitted. Nothing came back. He tried again. Still nothing. The net's dead, Jude said, voice thin. Or jammed. Lena's eyes went to the ridgeline east of the village. There, a brief metallic sparkle beneath a camouflage tarp. Not a sniper. Larger. Directional. Not dead, she said. Suppressed. Farad had set a field jammer. Of course he had. Mercer swore softly. Ruiz went back to Baines, who was drifting now, lips gray. The interpreter finally spoke, words tumbling out in Arabic so fast Jude could not follow. Nolan cut him off with a hand. English. The man swallowed hard. There is tunnel. Everything seemed still. Where? Lena asked. He pointed weakly toward the orchard. Old water tunnel. From orchard to the imam's house. And farther. Smugglers use. Fighters use. Schoolmaster maybe go there. Mercer stared at him. You knew this. I know stories. Not sure. I do not know this place used now. Lena's mind moved ahead 3 steps at once. Tunnel meant concealed movement. Tunnel meant the truck could load unseen. Tunnel meant the orchard was not just a killing ground, but a lid over the real route. Entrance. Nolan asked. The interpreter pointed to a squat stone structure near the lower edge of the orchard, half covered in vine and debris. From above, it looked like a collapsed pump shed. Farad had built the patrol's visible nightmare around a hidden artery. That was the twist inside the trap. Not just kill the squad. Occupy them. Silence them. Delay discovery while the true operation moved underground. Mercer looked up the slope, as if finally accepting that the woman on the radio was reading a different battlefield than the rest of them. Lena, if we can't call support and we can't move downhill, what's the play? She did not answer immediately, because the play forming in her head was terrible. It required splitting attention. It required trusting a wounded squad to hold a ruin against a net of unseen shooters. It required one lone recon operator to leave the safest high ground left, descend into the edge of the kill zone, and sever the tunnel route before the transfer completed. Alone, with no backup, against a man who now knew he was being opposed by someone trained enough to read him. Cam's voice seemed to come back through the years, dry and amused. You always know the right answer, Len. You just hate the price. She sighted on the pumped shed and saw, for the first time, a man briefly emerge from behind it carrying a crate with both hands. The crate was short, heavy, military green. Not food, not medicine, explosives. And behind him, for less than a second, another figure in a black scarf and a tan field jacket stepped into view, one hand raised while he gave instructions to men below. Farid. She knew him by the economy of the motion. No wasted gesture, no adrenaline. Just a conductor cueing an orchestra. He looked toward the shrine, toward the squad, toward the ridge. And though Lena knew the distance made it impossible, she felt as if he were looking directly at her. That just changed everything, didn't it? If your mind is racing right now, if you can feel this story tightening like a wire, subscribe. We live for stories where one revelation flips the whole battlefield. And trust me, the consequences of this are only getting sharper. Now watch what Lena does with impossible odds. Mercer, Lena said, voice level because level voices keep frightened men useful. Listen carefully. You're no longer on a route patrol. You are a fixed element in a live diversion. Your job is to survive and make noise only if forced. My job is the tunnel. No, Mercer said instantly. Absolutely not. We hold. You guide. You hold because you can't move. I guide until the transfer disappears underground, and then command find your bodies after sunrise next to an empty district and no target package. That's not your call. It is from where I'm lying. Nolan cut in. Lieutenant. Mercer didn't answer him. Lieutenant. Nolan said again, firmer this time. With respect, she's the only one seeing the whole board. Mercer's breathing rasped over the net. He was calculating command liability, mission priority, casualty math, ego, fear, and the very human disgust of sending one person into something he would not order his own team to do unless he had to. Which meant he was finally thinking like an officer. Talk to me, he said. Lena kept her scope on the pump shed. You fortify the shrine. Pull stones. Build a breastwork on the north and west faces. Ruiz stabilizes Baines as best he can. Jude, conserve battery. No chatter. Nolan, I need sectors marked and range estimate from your position in case I lose eyes. Holloway stays disciplined and doesn't shoot at shadows. The interpreter keeps speaking if he remembers anything else about the tunnel network. And you? Mercer asked. I'll move south, drop off this ridge, and come in on the tunnel from the low wash. Alone? Yes. Against how many? At least 8 in the visible sequence. She did not mention the invisible count. Probably more. Ruiz finally looked up from the wounded man. You're hit if they spot you. That's true of most things. This is insane, Jude said. No, Lena replied. This is arithmetic. Silence again. Then Nolan said, she's not wrong. Mercer exhaled slowly. If you go dark, you wait 10 minutes. If you hear 3 shots in quick succession from the orchard edge, you prep to move on my call. If you hear sustained fire from the tunnel side, and I don't come back on net, you hold until last light or until you are overrun. Hold until night. Jude said, you'll die in daylight crossing those lines if I fail. The honesty of it seemed to steady him more than comfort would have. Mercer's voice came back stripped of nearly everything but duty. Under protest, proceed. Lena was already packing before he finished. She folded the tripod, slung the rifle, checked sidearm, counted magazines by touch, palmed 2 smoke canisters, 1 flash, 1 shaped charge no bigger than a paperback. Her medkit was laughably small for what she was about to do. Her water was lower than she liked. Her knife sat exactly where it belonged. She paused with one hand on the mic. "There's one more thing," she said. "Go," Mercer answered. "If you hear someone on this net giving perfect instructions in my voice, ask what Cam used to burn his coffee." A beat. Jude frowned audibly. "What?" Fard records voices. Edits them. He's used imitation before. Challenge response only. Mercer's tone sharpened. "Answer." Lena slid the bowl home. Too much sugar and impatience. Then she cut the transmission and started down the backside of the ridge. The descent was worse than the climb had looked. Slate fractured under her boots. Thorn scrub clawed at her sleeves. The mountains smelled different here. Less dust, more cold mineral damp from the hidden watercourses under the slope. As the sky lightened, shape and distance changed with every step. Positions that had been invisible in darkness began to suggest themselves in color. A scrap of canvas under stones, a footprint pressed into chalk, a cigarette ember crushed hastily in mud. She moved with the old discipline, not the cinematic version people imagine, but the real one, which is mostly patience, discomfort, and a constant argument with your own desire to hurry. Every 30 seconds, she stopped and listened. Every minute, she checked behind. She used dead ground, ruined walls, ditches, and shadow lines. Twice, she dropped flat as gunfire cracked from the village. Once a pair of insurgents crossed a terrace only 30 yards ahead, carrying coils of wire and speaking in low voices. She let them pass. Killing them would solve nothing until everyone were to look. At the base of the slope, she found the wash Lena had hoped for. A dry channel winding between broken retaining walls and clumps of cane, invisible from the shrine, and mostly invisible from the orchard unless someone leaned far out. Good enough. She keyed the mic twice, just 2 soft taps. Nolan answered with one. They were still holding. As she worked east through the wash, she began to see the hidden infrastructure of the ambush from ground level. Old observation pockets behind stone. Spent batteries tucked into crevices. A coil of comm wire disguised under reed mats. Shallow scrape marks where crates had been dragged. Fard had not improvised this in a night. He had been building the district for weeks, maybe months, turning civilian decay into military function. That meant something worth protecting. A child's marble lay in the wash beside a boot print. Green glass, chipped. Another of Fard's habits. He did not always place sentimental objects as bait. Sometimes they were residue, signs that real people had lived here before strategy evicted them. Lena hated those more. A trap you set with innocence has a different kind of cruelty than one built from steel alone. She reached a break in the bank and risked a look toward the pump shed. 2 men visible now. One smoking, one dragging a second crate toward the entrance while muttering at the other to hurry. The shed itself was lower than she'd thought. One wall caved inward, roof patched with corrugated metal and brush. To the untrained eye, it looked abandoned. To Lena, it looked engineered to appear abandoned. No sign of Fard. That worried her more than if he had stayed in sight. She eased back, circled wider, and found the first outer warning device. 3 pebbles balanced on a strip of rusted tin tucked under a root. Primitive. Effective. The kind of thing smart men used because smart men distrusted complexity when simplicity could betray an intruder just as well. She disarmed it with the tip of her knife and moved on. 10 yards later, she found the second. Fishing line strung knee-high between 2 dead stumps, not connected to explosives, but to a cluster of hanging metal washers inside a broken clay pot. Alarm, not attack. Fard expected the tunnel to attract hunters. She smiled once, humorlessly. Good. Expectations could be used against him. She crawled under the line and reached the edge of the orchard proper. Up close, the dead pomegranate rows were even more sinister. Fine wire webbed the trunks at staggered heights, some taut, some slack, some clearly visible now that the sun was lifting. Grenades. Flares. Probably more. She chose a path along the irrigation berm, where old flood erosion had exposed roots and created a narrow shelf untouched by the wiring teams. Halfway there, voices drifted from the shed entrance. "Before the sun clears," one man said in Arabic. Another answered, "Then tell him the northern team is not answering." Lena froze. Northern team. The sniper, maybe. or the observer, or the machine gun. Enough pieces of the architecture had gone silent that someone below was finally feeling the hole in the pattern. She edged higher until she could see the shed door. A man stood with a radio pressed to his ear, frowning. Younger than she expected. Beard trimmed close. Field vest neat. Not Farid. A lieutenant type. The one smoking had finished his cigarette and crushed it beneath a sandal before disappearing inside with the crate. Then, from below ground, faint but unmistakable, came a sound that changed the temperature of the morning. A child coughing. Lena stopped breathing for a second. Not one cough. Two. Then the hush of an adult trying to quiet them. Prisoners, then. Civilians. Maybe families taken from the village. Maybe hostages for movement security. Maybe insurance against air support if anyone found them in time. Maybe something even worse. The mission had just acquired a new center of gravity. Lena pressed her mic. Mercer. A pause. Then his whisper, go. There are non-combatants in the tunnel. Can you confirm? Yes. Static. Then Ruiz in the background, saying softly, of course there are. Mercer came back on. What changes? Everything and nothing. I still need to shut it down. But if I can, I'm pulling them out. That's not in your orders. Lena watched the radio man at the shed scan the orchard with growing suspicion. Neither is leaving them. Mercer inhaled as if to argue, then let it out. Do what you can. Nolan cut in, almost gently. Watch your corners, Lena. She did not answer that. Some concern you carry by not touching. The shaped charge on her vest was now more liability than solution. If she collapsed the entrance with civilians inside, she might stop the transfer and bury the innocent with it. So she needed a quieter breach of the sequence. That meant isolation, confusion, extraction, then destruction if possible. Simple. Impossible. The radio man barked into his handset again and turned away from the door, pacing 3 steps left. In doing so, he exposed the back of his neck. Lena drew her sidearm. The pistol was the wrong tool at this distance, but the rifle was too long for the angle she had. She rested her wrist against a root, exhaled, and fired once. The man pitched forward without a sound. The smoking man reappeared instantly, eyes wide, rifle lifting. Lena hit him in the chest before he found target. He folded across the threshold and disappeared into the dark below. 7. Shouts erupted underground. No more stealth. Lena surged from cover and sprinted the last 20 yards in a low burst, feet landing where she had already mapped safe ground. One wire flashed beside her calf. She vaulted it. A second snagged her sleeve and snapped free with a metallic jingle that brought answering gunfire from somewhere deeper in the orchard. Rounds tore bark from the dead trees. She hit the wall of the shed, flattened, and listened. Concrete steps descended into cool blackness. Voices below. At least 3. One hurt. One shouting for the radio. One ordering someone to move the package. The package. She risked a glance inside. Narrow stairwell. Moisture on the walls. Old pump chamber converted into entry shaft. Farther down, amber lantern light, and a tunnel cutting east-west beneath the orchard. She pulled the flash, counted 1 breath, and threw. The detonation turned the stairwell white. Shouts became screams. Lena went in behind the blast, rifle tucked tight, boots hitting concrete, so fast the noise barely registered before she was at the bottom and firing. First man left, half blinded, weapon low. Down. Second man farther back, trying to shield his eyes. Down. Third man, not where she expected, but above, tucked into a maintenance recess on the right wall with a shotgun angled toward the stairs. He fired just as Lena turned. The blast hit stone and clipped her upper arm with a hammering line of heat. She dropped to one knee, shot twice, and the recess went still. 10 seconds. The chamber stank of old water, burned powder, and lantern fuel. A generator coughed in one corner beside stacked crates of explosives marked in faded Cyrillic. A tunnel led east, another west. To her right, behind a welded mesh gate now hanging open, for civilians huddled against the wall. 2 women, a gray-bearded man, and a little girl clutching a red scarf over her mouth to stop herself from crying. Somewhere deeper, a boy whimpered. Lena moved to them fast. Can you walk? They stared. She switched to rough Arabic the kind learned in the field and sharpened by necessity. Can you walk? The older woman nodded once. Stay low. Follow me when I say. The gray-bearded man pointed west, frantic. More men. Of course there were. Lena keyed the mic. Tunnel access confirmed. Civilians present. Multiple branches. I'm compromised. Mercer's answer came instantly. We heard the flash. Gunfire cracked above ground from the direction of the shrine. Holloway shouted something lost in the static. Status. Lena demanded. Nolan answered, breathless. Contact north and east. We're holding. 2 shooters minimum, maybe probing. Farid had synchronized the pressure. He knew she was inside now, or guessed it, and was squeezing the shrine to prevent reinforcement or escape. Do not come down, Lena said. Mercer almost laughed at that, exhausted and sharp. Wasn't planning on it. The little girl was staring at the blood running down Lena's sleeve. It's fine, Lena told her, though in truth the arm was going numb from shoulder to elbow. Not catastrophic. Not good either. From the west tunnel came the scrape of boots. Lena killed the lantern with 1 shot. Darkness swallowed the chamber. A man shouted. Another answered farther back. They had night-adapted less than she had. Good. She pulled one civilian group tight against the wall, put the older woman's hand on the girl's head, and slipped behind stacked crates just as a beam of flashlight knifed into the chamber. One insurgent entered crouched, light sweeping too high. Behind him came another dragging a radio wire spool. Lena let the first man pass the gate, then stepped out and struck the second across the throat with the edge of her hand before he could breathe. She caught his falling rifle by the sling, shoved him into the flashlight bearer, and fired through both silhouettes. 9 and 10. The radio spool clattered across the floor, unwinding cable like silver intestines. Somewhere in the east tunnel, a voice called sharply. Command voice. Calm. Farid. Lena felt it more than heard it. He did not rush toward gunfire like lesser men. He listened to it first. Waited. Let it reveal things. Then, in Arabic polished almost a courtesy, he said from the dark, You should leave before the mountain closes around you. Lena stayed behind the crates and switched mags with her good hand. You first. A soft laugh came back. Recon. He knew. Engineer, she answered. Another laugh, warmer this time, as if pleased by professionalism. So they finally sent someone literate. They sent a patrol. I was just stubborn enough to notice. Stubborn is not the word for coming underground alone. No, personal is the word. Lena said nothing. Farid let the silence work. You have already ruined excellent preparation. I respect that. But respect does not improve your position. Above ground, more shots cracked near the shrine. Jude's radio voice flared and vanished. Lena's gut tightened. Farid continued. You are counting men. I can hear it in your pauses. He wasn't wrong. So let me help, he said. You have stopped 10. There are more. Lena's thumb brushed the edge of her final smoke canister. 10 down by her count. Maybe 11 if the sniper had died. But numbers only mattered if they changed outcomes. She needed the civilians out and the explosives disabled. Everything else was vanity. The gray-bearded man touched her sleeve and whispered, Boy, east, right? The whimpering child. Farid had placed a moral tripwire in the dark. He spoke again, closer now, voice moving along the tunnel wall. You hear him. Of course you do. That is why you're slower than me. You still believe every life can be carried. Lena leaned around the crate and fired at the sound. Bullet sparks snapped from stone. No hit. He did not fire back. He was too disciplined for anger. The little girl whimpered. The older woman pulled her close. The bearded man kept pointing east, desperate. Lena keyed the mic twice, then spoke low. Mercer, I may need a diversion. Nolan answered first, strained. We're a little busy for theater. What's your ammo? Enough to regret this morning. Mercer cut in. Say what you need. 15 seconds of maximum noise north face. Make him think you're breaking. A pause. Then Mercer said, On your mark. Lena looked into the dark east tunnel and listened for the tiny involuntary betrayals people make when they think they control tempo. Cloth on stone. Foot repositioning. Breath not fully held. There. Mark. The shrine erupted. Rifles hammered from above in a violent, concentrated burst. Someone below ground shouted in alarm. Farad's attention shifted, just enough. Lena moved. She sprinted east through the tunnel, shoulders scraping damp brick, boots splashing through a thin run of black water. A shape rose ahead. She fired from the hip and kept going. The tunnel kinked right, widened, and opened into a second chamber where a boy of maybe 9 sat bound beside 2 more crates while an armed guard dragged him upright by the collar. The guard swung the boy toward Lena like a shield. She stopped. For one fraction of a second, that was all Farad needed. A shot cracked from behind her. Pain ripped across Lena's side, low and hot, spinning her into the wall. The chamber blurred. The guard smiled and started lifting his rifle again. Lena dropped, let the second shot go high, and shot the guard through the knee. As he screamed and folded, she fired again, center mass. 11. The boy crawled away, sobbing. Lena pressed a hand to her side. Blood came back warm between her fingers. Not good. Through and through, maybe a graze, maybe worse. Hard to tell under adrenaline. Behind her, footsteps approached at an unhurried pace. Farad did not need to rush now. He thought geometry had finally closed. Lena dragged the boy behind the nearest crate and shoved a small folding knife into his shaking hands. When I say cut your wrists free, then run to the women. Do you understand? He nodded, tears streaking dust down his face. Farad stopped just outside the chamber. When he spoke, his voice was almost kind. You are making yourself into a story. Lena steadied the rifle on the crate edge, though her left arm was nearly useless and her vision pulsed at the corners. Better than making myself into a grave, she said. A beat. Then Farad answered, sometimes they're the same thing. And from above, faint through layers of earth and stone, came a sound Lena had been dreading all morning. Rotors. Not close yet, but coming. Which meant the next move, hers or his, would decide whether rescue found survivors, wreckage, or an empty tunnel packed with explosives and ghosts. The sound was still distant, blurred by ridgelines and morning wind, but Lena knew rotor wash when she heard it. 2 aircraft, maybe 3, too heavy for local traffic, too measured for panic. Somebody, somewhere, had realized the patrol silence meant more than a dead battery. Farad heard it too. For the first time, the quiet confidence in the tunnel shifted by half a degree. Not fear, not even urgency, just recalculation. Lena used that fraction. She reached down without taking her eyes off the tunnel entrance and pressed the folding knife into the boy's bound hands again. Cut when I say. Then run low. Stay behind me. The boy's fingers shook so badly the blade clicked against itself. Farad spoke from the dark beyond the chamber. That sound will make your people impatient. They will rush to rescue the visible problem. Men always do. Lena kept the rifle steady, though her side throbbed in time with her pulse, and her left arm had gone from numb to burning. Maybe they will look for smoke, for movement, for what confirms their briefing. That's because briefings are written by men who love rectangles. A small pause. Then Farad laughed softly. I wondered if you had humor. Good. That means you still think survival is possible. The little boy looked up at her. Too young for any of this. Dust caked at the corners of his mouth. One eye swollen. But he was listening. Children in war learn fast, or they do not remain children for long. Above ground, the firing around the shrine flared again. Holloway loosed a long burst. Mercer shouted for fire discipline. Ruiz yelled something about conserving bandages. Nolan's voice cut through the rest like a blade through cloth, calm even under contact, anchoring the others by sheer refusal to break. Farad listened to those voices the way a musician listens to tuning strings, measuring temperament, measuring weakness. Then Lena heard another sound from behind him, a soft mechanical click. Not a rifle, not a radio, a recorder. Her stomach tightened. Mercer, she whispered into the mic, authenticate everything. Now, no answer. Only static, gunfire, and the thud of rotors growing closer overhead. Farad must have smiled in the dark, because when he spoke again, the words came with that subtle warmth men use when they know they have touched the nerve they wanted. You train very well, he said, but training is just the discipline of memory, and memory is easy to imitate. The next voice out of the tunnel was Lena's own. Perfectly Lena's. Tinny with radio compression, but perfect enough that if she had not been bleeding in the chamber hearing it with her own ears, she might have believed it too. Mercer, the false voice said through a hidden speaker somewhere in the West Passage, break south now. Orchard Edge is clear. Move immediately. The effect was instant. Above ground, boots scraped stone. Someone shifted. Jude sucked in a breath. Lena closed her eyes for one fraction of a second. This was why she had planted the challenge phrase. Nolan came over the net, voice low and hard. What did Cam use to burn his coffee? Silence in the tunnel. Then the fake Lena answered, a beat too late. Too much sugar. Close, but incomplete. The real answer had been too much sugar and impatience. From the shrine, Mercer roared, hold positions. Fake traffic. Farr did not swear. Men like him did not waste language on what they could convert into adaptation. But Lena heard the consequence anyway. The scrape of boots repositioning, the subtle acceleration of breath in the dark. He had expected her precaution. He had simply hoped the weight of pressure might make them forget it. It had not. And for one precious second, the battlefield tilted back toward her. Wait, did you catch that? One remembered detail just saved an entire squad. If you're feeling the brilliance of that setup paying off, subscribe. These are the stories that stay with you. The ones where one small truth matters more than 100 bullets. Now watch how fast Farr changes the game. Lena leaned out and fired once at the speaker housing clipped to the tunnel wall. Plastic shattered. The false voice died mid-syllable. At the same instant, Farr fired back. The round punched through the crate inches from her cheek, showering splinters across her face. The little boy flinched, but did not cry out. Good. Brave or stunned. Either would help. Now, Lena whispered. The boy sawed at the cord around his wrists. It gave on the second pull. Run. He bolted low, exactly as ordered, skidding through the darkness toward the pump chamber where the civilians waited. A second shot cracked behind him. Lena fired at the muzzle flash and heard a man grunt. Not counted. Not confirmed. She moved next, crossing from one stack of crates to the opposite wall in a half-crouch, pain ripping through her side as fresh blood soaked into her waistband. She hit the ground hard behind an old water pump housing, gasped once, and forced the breath quiet. Farr's footsteps did not pursue immediately. He was too careful for that. He knew she wanted him moving into uncertainty. The chamber settled into a tense, terrible stillness. Dust drifted in the lantern smoke smell that still lingered from the flash. Water ticked somewhere in the stone. Above, the rotors were louder now, the rhythm of them flattening the air in slow pulses. Lena used a brief pause to think. 3 crates in this chamber. More in the pump room. Generator fuel. Old tunnel supports reinforced in places but rotted in others. If detonated poorly, the blast would kill the civilians and maybe leave Farr another way out. If detonated correctly, it could collapse the east branch, seal the transfer route, and preserve the main stairwell long enough for extraction. But that assumed time, and time was leaking. She keyed the mic twice, waited for Nolan's click back, then spoke so softly she was almost breathing the words rather than saying them. Listen, if those helicopters are ours, Farr will try to make your shrine the visual center. Smoke, muzzle flashes, movement, maybe even planet bodies. He wants ISR fixed on you while he pushes the real cargo through secondary routes. Mercer answered, keeping his own voice low. What's the counter? Stay ugly but alive. No panic fire. No smoke unless I call for it. If you see men breaking uphill, they're not retreating. They're shaping your sight line. Jude came on next, surprising everyone with how steady he sounded now. Aircraft are circling north. Still too high. Good. Observing, not diving. Can you reach them? Lena asked. Jammer still chewing the net. Of course. She pictured the glint she had seen earlier under the camouflage tarp east of the village. Directional jammer. Probably battery-fed. Probably lightly guarded because Farr had trusted terrain and timing more than manpower. If she could cut it, Jude might get a clean burst through. But the jammer sat outside, and the east tunnel likely fed toward that sector. Which meant Farr wanted that route intact, too. The old bearded civilian had moved from fear into function, as elderly survivors often do when shock burns off and memory takes over. He crouched near the gate now, whispering to the others, then raised a trembling hand toward Lena. "There is side shaft," he murmured in Arabic. "Small. For water. To prayer house. Child can pass. Maybe woman. Not soldier. Where?" He pointed to a crack behind the rear crates in the pump chamber. Lena hadn't noticed it on entry. A narrow culvert. Ancient stonework. Maybe dry. Maybe half collapsed. Maybe useful. Farid spoke again from the east darkness, as if he knew they were making plans and wanted to poison the process. "The helicopters will not save them. Men in the air are blind unless someone on the ground is honest." Lena kept her tone neutral. "And you're worried honesty might break out." He ignored that. "You think I built all this to escape?" "No. Escape is what lesser men design. I built this, so every predictable response creates a second disaster. That is the only way to educate an army." There it was. Not greed. Not spectacle. Instruction. He wanted institutions to feel foolish. Helpless. Slow. He didn't simply kill. He curated humiliation. Lena had known men like that before. Some wore scarves. Some wore polished shoes and attended briefings under fluorescent lights. The methods changed. The appetite didn't. She used her sleeve to wipe blood from her palm and spoke toward the dark. "You mistake cruelty for intelligence." "No," Farid said. "I use intelligence to make cruelty efficient." That line would have haunted her later if there had been a later to haunt. Instead, she rose just enough to shift her angle and saw something in the tunnel wall she had missed before. A run of detonation cord disappearing upward through a bored hole in the stone. Not enough to bring down the whole chamber. Enough to cut off one branch. He had a failsafe. The moment she committed too deep, he would collapse the east route, trap her with the civilians, or cut her off from him entirely, then move another way. The only reason he had not already pulled it was because he still needed the branch for something. Maybe the truck. Maybe the jammer. Maybe himself. She checked the chamber again. The little boy had reached the others. One woman held him hard enough to make up for all the moments no one had held him at all. The girl with the red scarf never took her eyes off Lena. Strange what people choose to remember when terror is building around them. A scarf. A woman's voice. A smell. The shape of blue paint on a ruined wall. Lena made her choice. "Mercer," she said. "New plan. Go. I'm not holding this chamber. I'm peeling east, finding the jammer, and cutting their external control. If I can, I'll hit their exfil route from outside. You stay put until comms clear, or until you hear one long burst from the orchard edge. That's your signal. That's your signal to move the civilians if I bring them out. South slope only." Mercer hesitated. "And if you don't?" Lena looked at the girl, the boy, the old man, the women, then toward the darkness where Farid waited like a patient theorem. "Then Nolan takes command. You hold until air sees enough to matter." Nolan came on without ceremony. "Understood." "Lena." That was Ruiz. Quiet. Tired. Human. "How bad are you hit?" She almost lied, then decided he deserved the truth. Bad enough to be annoyed. A breath of laughter came from him, tiny and disbelieving and necessary. "Copy." She motioned the civilians tight against the wall and handed the bearded man the dead guard's flashlight. "Only when I say. Keep it down. Follow sound." He nodded. Farid had stopped talking. That meant he was moving, listening for her movement in return. So she gave him some. Lena took a loose cartridge from her vest and flicked it across the chamber. It clinked against the opposite wall. Instantly, 2 shots snapped toward the noise from deeper in the tunnel. Confirmed. At least one shooter still with him. Good. She moved the other way, low and fast, slipping back through the pump chamber to the rear crack the old man had indicated. Up close, the side shaft was uglier than she liked, barely shoulder wide, stones sweating moisture, reeking of earth and old water, but it sloped upward toward a draft of fresh air. A child could pass. A bleeding recon operator would have to earn it. She slung the rifle across her back, pushed the shaped charge ahead of her, and began to crawl. The first 10 feet stole her breath. The wound in her side scraped rock every time she exhaled. Mud soaked her chest. Pebbles bit into her knees. Twice she had to flatten her head completely to inch beneath a sagging lintel of stone. Behind her, muffled through layers of dirt, she heard Farid finally reach the chamber she had abandoned. A pause. Then, in the dark, his voice carried faintly through the shaft. Not anger. Recognition. He understood the old infrastructure almost as quickly as she did. That meant she had seconds, not minutes. She shoved forward harder. The shaft kinked left, narrowed, then opened just enough to let her drag the charge through and turn her head toward the faint square of gray ahead. Daylight. She crawled out beneath a broken prayer niche in what had once been the imam's side room, now roofless and half-choked with weeds. The prayer house sat lower than the shrine but higher than the pump shed, hidden from the village by a collapsed wall and an overgrown courtyard. From here, Lena could see three critical things at once: the orchard edge, the tarp-covered jammer position east of the village, and beyond that, the mud wall concealing the flatbed truck. The whole machine had just become legible. Farid's tunnel connected the hostages, the explosives, and the exfil route. The squad in the shrine was bait, yes, but also shield. Any rushed rescue or clumsy air response would center on the visible firefight while the truck loaded through subterranean access and slipped east along the dry canal. The jammer ensured confusion long enough for the handoff. Elegant, ruthless, and now vulnerable from one angle he had not expected anyone to occupy alive. Lena keyed the mic. "I'm outside. Imam's house ruins." Jude came back instantly, relief cracking through discipline. "We still have you. For now. Stand by." A movement near the tarp. One man, kneeling by the jammer battery stack, adjusting a cable with his back, turned toward her. Light guard indeed. Farid trusted the geometry more than the manpower. Lena settled behind the prayer wall, found her breathing, and put the crosshairs just below the man's ear. The shot took him forward into the machine. Sparks jumped. The tarp sagged as the jammer unit bucked sideways and went dead. 12. Static cleared so suddenly on the net it felt like a room opening. Jude nearly shouted, "Net is back. Net is back. Raven actual. This is 2-1 fix element. Troops in contact, complex ambush, civilians on site, possible high-value target, grid to follow, authenticate, authenticate." Mercer snapped the coordinates in, crisp now that the fog had lifted. Somewhere far above, someone finally had a real picture instead of missing patrol and a bad feeling. Lena did not have time to enjoy it. The truck engine turned over behind the mud wall. Farid had shifted to contingency. A man vaulted into the driver's position. Another started around the rear, as if to check the load point. Lena tracked the rear man first. He was faster to disappear. One shot. He dropped against the truck bed and slid out of sight. 13. The driver panicked, ground gears, and lurched the flatbed forward too soon. Its front wheel caught the edge of a concealed trench and slewed sideways, stalling for one fatal second in full view. Not long enough. Farid appeared beside the cab, one hand on the doorframe, the other calm as he pushed the terrified driver out and took the seat himself. Of course, he drove his own contingency. Of course, he trusted no one else with the last line of escape. The truck roared, clawed free, and turned east toward the dry canal. Lena fired through the windshield. The glass starred. The truck swerved but did not stop. Either she had missed clean or merely clipped him. Below, the pump shed area erupted with movement. Men shouting. Somebody had found the emptied chamber. Somebody else had seen the stalled transfer. The battlefield was finally unraveling faster than even Farid could script. "Mercer," Lena said, voice hard now, stripped to essentials. "Prepare to move civilians." 1 minute. "How many enemy active?" Mercer asked. "Too many to count, and not enough to stop us if you do exactly what I say." "Say it." "When you hear my burst, Nolan and Holloway put fire into the orchard north edge only. Not center, not east. Make them believe the breakout is there. Ruiz, be ready to move Baines if he can survive it. Jude, keep air updated and mark the truck moving East Canal. Do not lose that vehicle. You're going after it," Nolan said. It wasn't a question. Yes. With what? Lena checked her rifle, the smoke canister, the shaped charge, the ache in her bones, the blood soaking her side and the distance to the canal. With whatever still works. No one tried to stop her this time. That's the moment, isn't it? When there's no clean choice left. Only the one you can live with if you survive. If you're all in on this now, subscribe. We tell stories about courage under pressure because the human mind, at its best, is astonishing. And Lena's next move is exactly that. The dry canal cut east like an old scar through the district, walled by mud banks and lined with cracked culverts. In flood season, it would have been impossible. In summer, it was a road disguised as geography. The truck bounced into it, throwing pale dust, windshield shattered, engines snarling under strain. Lena ran parallel along the upper bank for 20 yards before dropping into a lower cut that let her close unseen. Every step hurt now, not metaphorically, not dramatically, literally. The wound in her side had stiffened her torso so badly that turning to breathe felt like prying open rusted hinges. Her left sleeve was heavy with blood from the shotgun graze. Her legs were still reliable, but reliability had an expiration date. She needed this done before her body noticed. The canal bent around a cluster of collapsed walls and narrowed where two retaining banks pinched inward. Good choke point. Better if prepared. Best if she got there first. She slid down the inner bank, yanked the shaped charge from her vest, and palmed the magnetic backplate against an old iron irrigation gate half buried in the mud wall. Not ideal. Good enough. The gate fed into a stacked stone support holding the outer bank together. Blow it at the right moment, and half the canal would avalanche inward. She set the timer for manual detonation and kept moving. The truck engine grew louder. Above and behind her, the shrine burst into gunfire on cue. Nolan and Holloway were walking rounds across the north orchard edge in disciplined arcs. Return fire answered almost immediately from the wrong places, proving Lena right about hidden shooters and false assumptions. Good. Let them keep looking uphill. Then, from the pump shed side, came the long burst she had promised. A harsh, continuous rip of automatic fire that tore through the orchard and echoed off the stone terraces. It was not hers. Mercer must have heard enough movement below and made the call himself, which meant the civilians were moving now, which meant every second mattered even more. The truck rounded the bend. Farad saw her at the same instant. She saw him clearly for the first time. He was older than the file photo in her memory. More gray at the temples, leaner in the face. Eyes steady, not feverish. Not a fanatic in the theatrical sense. Worse, an engineer to the bone. A man who had learned to treat souls like load-bearing calculations. Blood ran down one side of his neck from the windshield shot. He did not appear to notice. The truck accelerated straight toward her. Lena sprinted for the opposite bank and nearly lost her footing in loose clay. The truck clipped the place where she had been a heartbeat before, slammed into the narrowest point, and Farad saw the charge too late. She thumbed the detonator. The blast was less fire than violence. Stone, mud, and ancient iron tore outward. The canal wall collapsed into the truck's front axle with a thunderous groan. The vehicle pitched sideways, nose buried, rear wheels spinning in the air. Dust engulfed everything. Lena hit the ground hard behind the bank as debris rained over her helmet and shoulders. When the dust thinned, the flatbed was canted at 40 degrees, cab crushed against the fallen wall, tarp half torn away to reveal exactly what she had feared. Crates of explosives, yes, but also bound radio components, batteries, mortar fins, and stacked plastic jugs of accelerant. Enough material to arm a district for weeks or build something much worse for one spectacular afternoon. Farad kicked the driver's side door open and climbed out onto the tilted frame as if the wreck were just another inconvenient variable. He had a pistol in one hand. Lena had already lost sight of him in the dust. Then he was on the bank above her. He had used the collapse, not fled from it. She rolled as the first shot cracked into the mud where her shoulder had been. The second took a piece of her ear. The third she heard more than felt. She came up on one knee and fired twice. Farad dropped flat behind a broken slab, disappeared, then reappeared farther right with the kind of speed that came only from years of moving under fire. No wasted motion. No anger. Just adaptation. You should have stayed on the hill, he called. Lena moved left. You should have stayed theoretical. A small laugh. There it is again. He fired. She fired. Mud spat between them. Farid did not need to win this cleanly. He only needed to delay her long enough for the surviving outer teams to converge or for the explosives in the truck to become a threat neither side could touch. Lena needed one thing only, a line. A line of sight. A line of movement. A line in his thinking she could still break. She backed down the bank into the canal shadow, then came up opposite where she had been, using the dust and the wreck's tilted frame as intermittent cover. Farid anticipated the feint and shot where she was going, not where she had been. The round tore through her canteen and sprayed cold water down her thigh. Good shooter, better listener. So she stopped giving him the right sounds. She unclipped the smoke canister, lobbed it high over the truck, and waited. As the canister clanged off the flatbed and hissed white into the canal, Farid fired toward the likely exit point on instinct. Not there. Lena had gone low under the truck frame instead, dragging herself through dripping fuel and dust until she reached the passenger side, where the cab glass had blown inward. She rose inside the smoke only long enough to put 2 rounds through the rearview reflection of the bank behind her. Farid jerked away from his cover and fired at the phantom angle. That was the first impatient thing he had done all morning. Lena came up through the shattered passenger window and found him half exposed above the slab, turning back too late. She fired once. The round caught him high in the chest and spun him onto his back. 14. For a second, the whole world seemed to stop with him. No music, no revelation, no dramatic proclamation. Just a man looking up at the whitening sky with the kind of surprise people where when they have mistaken mastery for immunity. Lena kept the sights on him and climbed out of the cab. Farid was still breathing. Blood pulsed dark through his tan field jacket. One hand twitched near the pistol that had fallen beside him, but not toward it. He knew the mathematics now. She stopped 3 steps away. He looked at her properly for the first time, face to face rather than voice to voice or shape to shape through architecture. His eyes were startlingly clear. Not wild, not broken, simply observant to the end. You counted, he said. Yes. How many? Enough. His mouth moved in what might have been a smile if it had not been so tired. You're wrong about armies. Probably. They don't learn. Maybe not. Then what are you buying with this? She thought about the patrol and the shrine. Jude's shaking hands steadying over time. Nolan's dry voice under pressure. Ruiz fighting to keep Baines in the world. The girl with the red scarf. The little boy cutting his own bonds in the dark. Cam on another ridge years ago, laughing through pain because he knew fear loved silence. Time, Lena said. Farid blinked slowly, as if conceding the answer had elegance at least. Then his gaze shifted past her shoulder. Lena turned. 3 insurgents had broken from the orchard edge and were moving toward the canal through the dust. Late, scattered, uncertain now that the script had collapsed. She started to raise the rifle, then remembered the count. 14. No more needed. Above them, rotors dropped lower at last, banking hard as Jude's grid and Mercer's corrections finally translated into understanding. The nearest aircraft rolled into a hover offset from the shrine. Door gun pointed not at the visible ruin, but the canal approach and the eastern terraces beyond it. Somebody in the air had finally seen the true flow of the fight. The 3 men in the dust froze, looked up, and broke the other way. Lena let them go. Not every ending arrives through a crosshair. She knelt beside the truck bed instead and ripped open the first tarp, looking for initiators, dead man switches, secondary traps. There were plenty. Farid had built redundancy into everything. But redundancy creates signatures, and signatures can be cut. She found a main firing circuit under a crate of mortar fins and tore it free. Found a battery chain leading to a blast relay and smashed it with the butt of her rifle. Found a backup handset wired under the driver's seat and flung it into the dust. Then her knees nearly gave out. The adrenaline edge was going. Bad sign. She keyed the mic with hands suddenly heavier than stone. Truck secured. HVD down. Civilians moving. Mercer's reply came ragged with exertion and disbelief. Moving now. We got all 5. Repeat. all 5 civilians. Baines is alive. Nolan's hit in the shoulder, but functional. Holloway caught frag in the calf. We're descending south. Lena sat back against the truck's ruined frame and closed her eyes once. All 5. For 1 second, that was enough. Then Nolan came on, breath hissing through pain. Lena, talk to me. She opened her eyes again. The world had narrowed around the edges, colors too bright in the center and dim elsewhere. Still here. Good. Because we're not adding your body to this morning. She almost answered with something dry, something professional, something that would preserve the spacing between them. Instead, what came out was honest. I'm not planning to make your paperwork worse. That earned a cracked laugh from him. The helicopters shifted again, one peeling east to track the outer terraces, the other settling lower over the southern slope, where Mercer was guiding the civilians and casualties through the only safe line Lena had left intact. Rotor wash-hammered dust flat. Voices multiplied on the radio as command, air, and ground finally entered the same reality. And with all that noise around her, Lena felt the strange quiet that comes only after survival becomes probable. Not certain, just probable. She looked back at Farid. His eyes were closed now. The same morning wind that had carried diesel and dust at 0347 lifted the edge of his jacket and let it fall again. Another intelligent man laid down by the arithmetic he had spent years perfecting. Another battlefield already reshaping his absence into future trouble. Someone would fill the vacuum. Someone always did. But not today. Today mattered too. Below the canal bank, the girl with the red scarf appeared first between 2 militia-looking rescue personnel from the aircraft crew. She was walking on her own. The little boy came next, still clutching the folding knife Lena had given him. One of the women had Baines's spare blanket around her shoulders. The old bearded man kept turning as if to confirm that the tunnel had remained behind them and had not somehow followed. Then Mercer came into view, supporting Holloway on one side while Ruiz and another crewman carried Baines on a litter. Jude had the radio still slung across his chest, filthy and wide-eyed, no longer looking like the youngest man on the hill, but not yet old enough to understand that change in himself. Nolan brought up the rear, one arm hanging blood-soaked and useless at his side, rifle still in the other hand because some men would carry discipline even if it meant bleeding for it. When he saw Lena against the truck frame, he slowed. Mercer saw her next and stopped entirely. For a few seconds, no one said anything. The whole morning seemed to gather in that silence. The ignored warning, the first halted step, the chalk tally on the wall, the mine, the mortar, the tunnel, the false voice, the jammed net, the truck, the count. Jude finally broke it. You actually did it. Lena looked at him. It's rarely that simple. No, he said, with a kind of stunned reverence that was not hero worship so much as reorientation. I mean, you actually saw it. All of it. She had no answer for that, because no one ever sees all of it. Not even close. You just see enough if you're lucky and disciplined and willing to trust what looks wrong before it becomes fatal. The little girl with the red scarf stepped out from behind the crewman, holding her hand, and walked the last few feet toward Lena. She was maybe 7, maybe 8. Hard to tell in places where fear stunts childhood. She stared at the blood on Lena's sleeves, then at the rifle, then at Lena's face. From somewhere in a pocket or fold of clothing, she produced a small wax stub, the remnant of a candle, blue at the base. The same blue as the ruined shrine walls. She held it out. Lena frowned. For me, the girl nodded. A translation was not needed. Some things cross without language. Lena took the candle stub carefully, as if it were more explosive than everything in the truck behind her. It smelled faintly of smoke and old paraffin. Something ordinary carried through catastrophe. Something that said, I saw you in the dark, even if I never saw you arrive. Stories like this remind us what we're capable of, don't they? If you're feeling that quiet weight in your chest right now, subscribe. We're here for stories that reveal what courage really looks like when no one is supposed to be watching. And this one still has one last truth to give you. Mercer stepped forward at last. He looked at Farid's body, then at the shattered truck, then back to Lena. There was dirt in the cut across his ear where the sniper's round had kissed him earlier. He looked older than he had before dawn. Better maybe. Less polished. More real. I owe you an apology, he said. Lena shook her head once. No time. I'm making time. She almost smiled. Then make it after evacuation. He nodded, accepting the correction. Nolan came up beside him and studied the truck load with a low whistle. That's what we were for. Yes. He looked at Farid. And him. Yes. Nolan shifted his rifle to the other hand and winced. I heard what you said earlier. About us being bait. You were. He grunted. Hate it when the truth is rude. You get used to it. No, you don't. That almost made her laugh. Almost. Above them, one of the aircrew shouted that they had maybe 4 minutes before fuel and tasking forced a hard decision. Mercer started organizing movement without needing to be told again. Ruiz checked Lena's side and immediately stopped trying to be casual about his expression. That bad? She asked. It's not good. He glanced at her arm. And this is not helping either. Useful clinical language. I saved my poetry for mass cast events. He cut away fabric, packed what he could, and slapped pressure bandages into place with the brisk competence of someone who had already seen too much blood before breakfast. You should have gone down twice already. I had a schedule. That schedule is canceled. The little boy, the one from the East Chamber, had drifted closer now, too, the knife still in his hand until one of the crewmen gently took it from him. He said something in Arabic, too fast for Mercer, too quiet for Ruiz. The old bearded man translated. He says he thought the tunnel was the world. Then he heard your voice and knew there was another world above it. No one spoke for a moment after that. Even the rotors seemed farther away. Lena looked down at the boy. He would remember the tunnel forever. The damp smell, the dark, the fear, the hand that gave him a blade and an order. Maybe he would remember the order most clearly. Cut. Run low. Stay behind me. Or maybe he would remember the voice more than the words. That was how memory worked under pressure. It saved fragments and called them a whole life. Mercer got the civilians loaded first. Good choice. Then Baines, pale but still breathing. Holloway followed, cursing softly through gritted teeth because a man like him would rather walk broken than be carried intact. Nolan refused help until Jude threatened to tell the story badly if he passed out, which finally got him moving with a snort of reluctant amusement. Then it was Lena's turn. She stood because pride is rarely wise and often automatic. The world lurched hard to the left. Ruiz caught her before she hit the truck frame and muttered, "There she is." I was wondering when gravity would become persuasive. She let them guide her toward the aircraft. At the ramp, she looked back once. The village lay spread beneath the rising sun in all its brutal clarity now. The schoolhouse wall with its chalk tally. The orchard threaded with death. The shrine where stones had become salvation because one squad had finally learned to distrust the obvious. The prayer house. The canal. The collapsed tunnel routes. Smoke rising in thin gray lines where firefights and explosives had briefly made architecture honest. From above, command would build reports and overlays and slide decks. They would name the sectors, the devices, the neutralized HVT, the interdicted material. Someone would write that a recon-qualified attachment operating in concealed Overwatch identified and disrupted a complex insurgent ambush and prevented a secondary transfer of explosives and detainees. All of that would be true. None of it would feel like the morning. The morning had felt like cold dust and a copper glint under gravel. Like hearing a dead man's patience in the way a village held still. Like knowing that the trap was never where the bomb was, only where panic wanted you to stand afterward. Inside the aircraft, Jude settled across from her, radio still hugged close, as if it were the one object that had not betrayed him. His face was streaked with grime. There was a cut on his chin he had not noticed. When the crew chief waved him farther in, he shook his head. He wanted to stay where he could see her. Lena understood that too, not because she mattered in some mythic sense, but because the human nervous system, after a long stretch of fear, clings to the source of its first reliable pattern. The voice that was right, the hand that stopped the step, the presence that made the dark legible. The aircraft lifted. Below them, the district shrank into terrain again. Terraces, walls, roads, geometry. From altitude, almost any battlefield can pretend to be simple. Jude leaned closer to make himself heard over the rotor thunder. When you said it, back there, I'm recon-trained. Lena looked at him. I thought you were just trying to win an argument. She glanced toward the shrinking village below. So, did your lieutenant? That got the smallest smile out of him. Then his face turned serious again. How did you know? About the laundry, the goats, the road being too clean. She could have given him a lecture. Pattern analysis, human terrain, threat templating, the sociology of absence, the language of improvised explosive placement, the 1,000-hour apprenticeship of noticing what ordinary people leave behind when they are truly ordinary. Instead, she gave him the answer he might actually keep, because the ground was trying too hard to look harmless. He sat with that. After a while, Nolan's voice drifted from farther down the cabin. Kid, write that down. Might save your legs someday. Mercer, strapped into the opposite side with his ear bandaged and his pride undergoing more useful repairs, added, and next time an unseen operator says halt, we halt first and ask for rank later. Ruiz snorted. Outstanding doctrinal growth. The aircraft banked south toward the field hospital, sunlight flashing off the valley river far in the distance. Through the open side, cold air needled in and carried with it the clean, impossible scent of snow from higher elevations. After all the dust, it felt unreal. Lena looked at the blue candle stub still in her hand. That small thing undid her more than the gunfire had. Not outwardly, not dramatically. No tears, no speech, just a sudden pressure behind the ribs where grief and relief had always shared a border. Kemp should have lived to hear this story. Men like Baines should not be 19 or 23 or whatever precise age war likes best. Villages should not become equations. Children should never have to interpret kindness by whether arrives armed. But one patrol was alive. 5 civilians were alive. One truck was no longer moving toward whatever future had been planned for it. For a morning's work in a place built for subtraction, that counted as a kind of victory. By the time they reached the field hospital, Lena had drifted in and out twice. The medics cut more gear away, asked questions she answered on delay, and wheeled her through a corridor that smelled of antiseptic, hot wiring, and stale coffee. Real coffee this time, not Cam's ruined version. Somewhere nearby, someone groaned in pain. Somewhere else, someone laughed too loudly at something not quite funny, because sometimes the body mistakes survival for joy. Before the double doors to surgery swung shut, Nolan appeared at the edge of her fading vision, arm in a sling, stubborn as weather. Hey, he said. Lena blinked at him. He tilted his head, squinting as if the words needed careful aim. 14. She stared for a second, then realized what he was asking. The count. She let out a breath that might have been a laugh if she'd had more energy. Confirmed. Nolan nodded once, deeply satisfied by the number for reasons he probably could not have explained to anyone who had not been there. Good. Then, after a pause, he added softer, for the record, you were right from the first step. Lena's eyes were already closing. That's usually when it matters. When she woke again, the light in the room had changed. Late afternoon, maybe evening. Hospital time is its own weather. The pain had edges now, sharpened by medication rather than erased. Her side was wrapped. Her arm was immobilized. Someone had cleaned the dust from her face, but missed a line of dry blood near her hairline. The blue candle stub sat on the metal tray beside the bed. For a while she just looked at it. Then there was a knock on the partly open door, followed by Jude edging in, as if uncertain whether he was permitted to enter a space where people came back from anesthesia. He had changed uniforms. Or tried to. The clean shirt only made the shadows under his eyes more obvious. You're not dead, he said, then winced. Sorry. That sounded better in my head. Lena's voice came out rough. Most things do. He smiled awkwardly and stepped farther in. In his hands was a folded piece of paper. Not standard issue. Torn from a notebook. What is that? He looked suddenly embarrassed. I wrote down the sequence. Before I forgot it wrong. Lena held out her good hand. He gave her the paper. On it, in cramped block letters, he had written a list. Copper glint under dust. Laundry in empty village. Goats tied in moonlight. Mud wall dried uneven. Road too clean. Child's sandal. No birds in orchard. Trust challenge phrase. Ground trying too hard to look harmless. At the bottom, he had written one more line. The trap is where panic wants you to stand. Lena stared at it for a long moment. Cam said that. She murmured, not meaning to speak aloud. Ooh, a friend. Jude nodded, as if the answer made sense without details. Maybe it did. Combat creates invisible company around the living. The dead remain in the room whenever the lesson they paid for is being passed on. He shifted his weight, then asked the question that had likely been waiting in him since dawn. Why were you really there? Lena looked from the paper to the candle and back. The official answer existed. Attached Overwatch. Route Anomaly Review. Cross-sector reconnaissance support. All clean. All true enough to enter a file. But Jude had earned the less polished version. Because I'd seen Fard's work before, she said. And because I knew what happened when people underestimated how patient he was. Jude absorbed that quietly. So you volunteered? Yes. For us. Lena considered the word. Us. Not just the squad. Not just the civilians. Not just the mission. Us as in everyone who still believed some warnings were worth listening to even when they arrived from the dark and sounded inconvenient. For the possibility, she said, that this morning didn't have to end the way he designed it. Jude looked at the paper in her hand, and then at her with a kind of solemnity that made him seem, for the first time, exactly the soldier he might become rather than the young one he had been at 0347. I think he would hate that. Who? Farid. Lena let her head sink back into the pillow. Then I'm glad we could disappoint him. He almost laughed, caught himself, then finally let it happen. At the door he paused. Mercer wants to talk to you too. And Nolan said if you wake up argumentative, that means the doctors did their job. That sounds like Nolan. Jude nodded. Then he added, more quietly, I won't forget your voice. The room stayed still after he left. Outside, boots passed. Carts rolled. Somewhere down the hall, someone called for more saline. The hospital kept doing what hospitals do after battle, turning noise into triage, triage into effort, effort into whatever odds remain. Lena unfolded Jude's note again and looked at the last line. The trap is where panic wants you to stand. She could hear Cam saying it as clearly as if he were leaning in the doorway with that terrible coffee cup in his hand, amused that she was still alive enough to repeat him. Maybe that was all legacy really was. Not monuments. Not medals. Not the polished after-action language that made chaos sound tidy. Maybe legacy was a sentence carried forward by someone who survived long enough to need it. The next morning, before discharge and debrief and all the machinery that follows violence, a nurse brought in a plain cardboard box with Lena's recovered gear. Inside were the usual things, her watch, her throat mic, spare magazines, a cracked compass, a field notebook damp at the edges. And on top of them, wrapped carefully in gauze by hands more tender than war deserved, was the blue candle stub. No note. None needed. Lena set it beside the folded paper from Jude and watched the first real daylight of the new day enter the room. It touched the candle first, then the page, then the back of her bandaged hand. Out in the valley, briefings were already beginning. Reports, grids, questions, names, assessments, promotions maybe, reprimands probably. Somewhere a map had Farid's district outlined in red with arrows and icons marking what had happened there. But Lena knew the truest version would never fit on any map. It would live instead in habits. In the way Mercer would halt faster next time. In the way Nolan would listen harder to the strange detail no one else respected yet. In the way Jude would notice when ground tried too hard to look harmless. In the way a little girl might one day remember that someone came into the dark and spoke as if escape were a practical thing. War changes people in grand ways, yes, but more often it changes them by inches. A delayed step, a checked doorway, a challenge phrase remembered under pressure. A refusal to trust the obvious path simply because fear wants speed more than truth. That was what Lena had really defended on the hill and in the tunnel and by the canal. Not just bodies. Discipline. Attention. The thin human ability to resist the shape of someone else's trap. And maybe that was why, long after the pain medication wore thin and the paperwork thickened and the stories started being retold by men who had only heard the clean parts, One line from the morning stayed sharper than all the rest. Not the gunfire, not the count, not even Farid's final question. It was the moment before the first explosion, when a boot hovered over dust and copper and death, and an unseen woman on a ridge said halt with the authority of someone who had learned the world by nearly losing herself to it. They ignored her warning for half a breath. Then they listened. And because they listened in time, 6 soldiers, 5 civilians, and one morning that had been designed for ruin became something else entirely. Not safety, not peace, something rarer, a second chance. And out on the edges of every dangerous place, where roads stay too clean and villages hold themselves too still and the ground waits for impatience to make its move, that is sometimes the most powerful thing one human being can give another. A voice in the dark, a true warning, and the courage to obey it.